Peacemaking makes peace where there is no peace,
Yes.
or where there is a lack of peace, or where there's rumbling underneath the surface. I know you've all had conversations where you have swept things under the rug, where you've not said anything when you've really been offended or whatever, and you just played nice, plastered your smile
To
on, did your
keep
little
the
side hug.
peace.
Yeah, that you've thought of that as keeping the peace, but that's not peace making, because there wasn't really peace. There's not peace under the surface.
Right.
So it's a false sense of peace.
Yes. Welcome to Kingdom Over Everything. I am your host and chief fire igniter, Shae Bynes. And I have with me Leigh Sloan. What is going on, Leigh?
Hey Shay, thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Okay, so Leigh, you reached out to me after another episode that I released of Kingdom Over Everything. I'm pretty sure it was the episode that we were talking about, the very first episode around diversity, equity, inclusion from a kingdom lens. And you
Mm-hmm.
reached out, and I loved what you had shared with me. And I'm like, let's hop on the phone or hop on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And you were working on a book that we got to talk about. And after I read it, I'm like, we should talk about the stuff that's in there because it's super good. So I appreciate you joining me today.
Right. You flipped the script on me. I was trying to get you on my podcast, and then you asked me on your podcast. I was like, that was pretty sneaky.
I think it's such a relevant conversation. And so, I want to have it. I've been having conversations on this show for the last several months around, we've had multiple conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion. We've had multiple conversations around communicating in the midst of like cultural division, like how to walk this thing out. And you, which I can't wait to dig into your story a bit, you have actually practical application walked out these brave conversations, invited other people into having them, and have facilitated them. So it hasn't just been you, but you've also helped others and created spaces for others to do the same. And I think that's really important work. And so let's hop in. All right.
Ah,
So, Leigh, why don't we start by you sharing a bit of background in terms of kind of what you do day to day. I know you have Brave Nation, and what led to you even having brave conversations and creating space for that, what that's looked
yeah.
like.
Well, it actually started several years ago. I was in ministry, I'm a lifelong minister. And I started seeing rumblings in our culture. I started seeing unrest. This was even before 2020. This is before even George Floyd happened. I mean,
Right? That was what, May 2020.
yeah, I started just seeing these rumblings, and I was like, we are not talking. We are not talking well enough, and we're putting up barriers, and it's just not healthy for our culture. And I started seeing really concerning signs that I saw in our culture. And growing up in Los Angeles, California, I grew up with a lot of diversity, a lot of and even just socioeconomic. I went to public school, LA Unified Public School System. Then I went to private school. It was, I got to, then I moved to Missouri, small town.
Ah, that's different.
So that's some diversity right there.
Facts.
So and then on top of that, I'm Italian. And so we learn to fight. We fight, but then we love each other, right? We argue, and we can laugh and cry, and we can want to kill each other in the same sentence. So
Right.
basically, I realized, like, I wasn't afraid of these conversations. I actually wanted to have them. I mean, I was a little bit afraid. Everyone's a little bit afraid. But
Sure.
I realized people are starting to get afraid. But when we actually started talking, I realized it wasn't as scary. But people had to get over their fears, and they had to just have a place to do that. So we started having conversations on Facebook, actually on a private Facebook group, because when
Okay, a
every
private Facebook group.
because when everything is public nowadays, the stakes are so high.
Oh my
You
gosh,
have
for
that
real.
like losing face type of thing, and it doesn't help the conversation at all, because then you're just trying to prove to the world, that you're right, and it's
Yeah.
this conversational arm wrestling. And so what I found was there were so many debates, which normally a debate declares a winner and a loser. And I was like, no, that's not a transformative conversation. Not that debates are necessarily bad and there isn't a place for them, but if all our conversations are debates, we're not going to get anywhere. And so I
Yeah.
thought, what are the most transformative conversations that I've had, and how can I help facilitate those? What are the roadblocks along the way, and how can I help people avoid those roadblocks?
Okay, so when you start, so what year was that? Is this like 2016? Is this like, because I remember rumblings, I feel like rumblings really started going down in a pretty significant way around 2016, and they just continued from there. Is it
Yeah,
somewhere in between there,
probably
2016?
probably in there. I'm so
Yeah, yeah,
bad
yeah.
about dates, but yeah, it's been quite a while. So
So what were those first conversations? So you start this private Facebook group, and what types of topics did you start with just out the gate?
I mean, it kind of just ran everywhere. There was a lot on culture and, uh, diversity. You know, we had different people from different cultures. You know,
Sure.
people from LA, people from all over the nation actually. And some of the brave conversations we had, a couple of them were online. So that was pretty fun because you can throw people in a chat, and you know how Zoom like just chooses whoever. And then you
Right.
just get mixed and you talk with people, and it's really eye opening. But a lot of them were Christians, and so they at least had that framework for like we're supposed to love each other. But
We're supposed to.
yeah, not all
Yes.
of them were Christian conversations, but just if we can come to the table knowing that we want to respect one another, and that's kind of how we play the game, then it really helps set you up for success. So yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so what did you learn in those early days of putting yourself out there and creating those spaces for people on
yeah.
some tough conversations?
Well, I talk about one of them in my book, and I did change some of the names, but one of them was a black woman who identified as a lesbian, coming on here and talking with my friend, another friend of mine who was just a white guy. And well, you say that just a white guy, but she had no idea what his background was, and he was
Sure.
coming at it from more of like a conservative, like I don't see race, I don't care, and she was like, but how could you not see it? How, this means, this is, I'm an oppressed color of skin, and this is, her framework. And she's like, you're a you know, cisgendered white man, what do you know about it? So when they started talking, they didn't really have the right language for it. And what happened was we started the conversation where I was in it, and then it was a group. So then they started chatting, and I couldn't see what was happening. So then, like, she ended up leaving the group, and it was like, it was kind of volatile, And so but I knew both of these people in person. And so that helped. And I just was like, can you come back? Can we actually have a face to face instead of these keyboard wars, right? And can we talk to each other? Because I think you guys are both reasonable people, and the best doesn't come out of you when you're having keyboard wars. So let's get you back on and let's talk about this more. So come to find out, what she didn't know is that he had been raised in Hong Kong, and he actually was a minority, and he actually was physically beat up because of being a white guy. And so they had, he had experienced it to the level that she hadn't even in the States. And so then as they talked more, they realized, okay, let's get on the same page with our terms, and they realized, okay, we could actually go hang out sometime if we ever see each other.
So did you find yourself having to create, as kind of a facilitator, having to facilitate the ability to find common language, or like do you help people find that common language? Like what does that look like for you?
Well, some of the things we found out, like the things that don't help, when you're talking to someone, when you're intentionally talking to someone on the other side of whatever fence you're on, is starting with the who, really doesn't help. Like if you start arguing about Trump and Biden or something like that, like that's really not going to get you very far, most likely, because people have all kinds of like background and who they think that is. And it starts to get tribal. Like, I'm lining up behind this person, you're lining up behind this person. And how could you dare side with that person, But when you start with the what, like, what principles are we actually talking about? And when you start beginning mining for common ground and common terms, like, we need to talk about our terms. Like, what do you mean when you say this? What's the definition of your word? Because our words are changing so rapidly
That's
that we
true.
can't even, like, we're talking, somebody's saying this word and the other person's saying the same word, but they're talking about two different things.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they're
So
saying my definition matters.
I literally experienced that with the word woke when I was referring to the original woke that comes from black culture woke, and someone else
Right.
was talking about the political talking point in football woke. It's like that's
Right.
not what I'm talking.
Yeah.
new words, same words, new definitions.
Words are being weaponized against us.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so have you always done these? I kind of remember from our first conversation. Haven't you done some of these face to face
Mhm.
conversations too? So you
Yeah.
started online, and then it kind of morphed into also some face to face. Talk to me about that too.
Yeah, so we started having face to face, which is really the best way to have a brave conversation. You can
Yes.
feel someone. I mean, there's something about us when we get face to face that we're nicer and we're just more people oriented, right? So
Yeah.
so, yeah, we started having these face to face ones. And at first, it's hard to bring people to the table that are on different sides. And so we actually had to kind of force the disagreement. It's kind of funny. We had these cards that we would hold up, and you would see a topic on there. And if you agree with the statement, you put a thumb up. If you disagree, you put thumb down. So
Okay.
that way you could kind of do like a reverse speed dating. And so after we would have our main conversation, which we would have a couple people chosen to talk about a predetermined topic, and we would take them through that topic, and I would facilitate that. And then we would break up into these groups, and they would do the thumbs up, thumbs down thing, and then they would talk about whatever topic was on that topic. So so that was really good because it's like we're choosing to seek out people that are different from us, which is different from what we normally tend to want to stick with our
Right.
echo chambers,
That's right.
the people that agree with, because it makes us feel good. And
Yes.
that's, there is a place for that, but to intentionally seek someone out that's different from you says a lot about your character, says a lot about your bravery and your willingness to learn.
Yes.
So, coming into it with the idea that they have a gift to give you, you know, and it was really awesome. And I think a lot of those, the straw man, that we build up in our mind of who the enemy is,
Yes.
was really broken down because you're sitting there with a real person. They have real reasons that they believe what they
Yes.
believe. And you start just asking questions, and you're there to learn, you're not there to win. So,
I that right there, that right there. I loved that because I was going to say I loved how you said coming from the perspective that someone has a gift for you. So you're already coming, if you come from that perspective, you're already coming ready to receive in that conversation, which goes back to your next point, which is like, I'm not coming to win. It's like, what did you say? You're not coming to win, you're coming to.
what did I say?
Oh, you're like, I don't know. I was just flowing. But you were saying it wasn't about winning,
You-
but I don't. It's the
yeah.
engagement. It's the conversation. It's not
And the
about
transformation. Yeah.
transformation and not about
And to learn.
winning, right? And so
Mhm,
if you're coming
mhm.
with that, like you're here to bring something to the table, you're here to receive something from the table, and it's not about
Yeah.
winning, it's around the engagement, then that's super
Right.
powerful. Okay, so I really want to talk to you about this concept of peacemaking and peacekeeping. But before we go there, tell
Mhm.
me, now that you've done this online, creating space for brave conversations, now you've also done this face to face, creating spaces for brave conversations. Like, what's next around this? Was that kind of a massive experiment to learn, just Holy Spirit just showing you some things that would help you
Yeah.
to help people to kind of do that in their own lives? Or is there kind of a next phase of that for you and bringing people to the table?
Yeah, we're currently trying to revive Brave Conversations. I have more of a team now, and so we haven't done our first one yet since the pandemic, but we're looking to do that more, and we're actually looking to help people do this in other places. So I on my website, bravenation.online, I actually put a little bit of a template of how we do it
Good.
that you can sign up for, and you can get a template to where you can start having these brave conversations, because I think we need to cultivate in our culture. We need to cultivate peace,
Yes.
and this is how we do it. We don't do it from running away from these things. And a lot of people think, well, that's how I protect myself, is running away. We do it by engaging intentionally. So
Yeah.
before we come to war,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so speaking of that, so I was just thinking about how timely it is for people to be having these conversations. Now, the book that you wrote that I read and I really did enjoy. You have a copy of it. It's the pre-copy. There it is. Pride. Pull it over a little bit to the side. There we go. Pride and privilege expand your influence in cultural chaos. Okay. All
Yes.
right. So I love that. Expand your influence. And tell me that's the sub again.
Expand your influence in cultural
In cultural
chaos.
chaos. Okay. So on that, because this goes back to us having kingdom influence. And that's why I want to talk about this peacemaking versus peacekeeping. and just some of the things that the Lord's shown you concerning that and how that has played out in its practical application and the things that you're helping people to do around having brave conversations. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, we know that our Lord is the Prince of Peace, right?
Yes.
And but yet that word peace is kind of convoluted because we think, heal the world, make it better.
That was a great
We
song.
kumbaya, whatever it is, and we think that it looks one way. If you had a lot of turmoil in your family, you think peace is placidity.
Mm,
That peace is everything is good on the surface. That's not actually true peace all the time. And so and historically, we've been in a country where we've been blessed with peace,
yeah.
like on the surface, right? We might have gone to war different places, and I know we had 9/11, but mostly we've had peace. And so we're used to peacekeeping, which peacekeeping is keeping peace that's already there. I
Yeah.
mean, it's in the word, right?
Yes.
So peacekeeping is a skill. I mean, you don't want to go when you first meet somebody and just blast them. I mean, you want to have that grace. You want to give it time, you want to not just pick a fight everywhere you go. But then at the same time, some people, and especially Christians, are really bad at this. We want to be super nice, and we never want to get underneath the surface. And peacemaking is a contrast, because peacemaking makes peace where there is no peace,
Yes.
or where there is a lack of peace, or where there's rumbling underneath the surface. So when I started seeing the rumbling under the surface, I was like, or you can even look at the metaphor of shoving, sweeping things under carpets, right? You have all these lumpy carpets. We have them in churches,
Yeah.
we have them in culture. We just kind of try to hide. And I know you've all had conversations where you have swept things under the rug, where you've not said anything when you've really been offended or whatever, and you just played nice, plastered your smile
To
on, did your
keep
little
the
side
peace.
hug. Yeah, that you've thought of that as keeping the peace, but that's not peacemaking, because there wasn't really peace. There's not peace under the surface.
Right.
So it's a false sense of peace.
Yes.
And so because I think I came from a pretty healthy family, like I realized you do have to have some conflict to love one another. You
Mm,
actually have to get out, pull the rug up, sweep it out, and it does look more messy when you do that. It feels uncomfortable, it feels messy, but the intimacy that you can experience and the transformation you can experience, if we keep those carpets lumpy and if we don't deal with them, um, we don't experience true community. We don't experience the depth of relationship, and we stay isolated, and I think that just causes more mental health and all that type of stuff. So mental health crises,
right.
right, rather. So we just need to get that stuff out, and I was seeing that things are not healthy, and we need to deal with it before we have a real problem on our hands,
Yeah.
and things start festering under there.
Yeah, and it's funny because we're talking about cultural chaos, and there's just like there's all of these kind of micro areas where there's chaos. Like you said, there's chaos within the body of Christ. Like there's chaos within just the
Absolutely.
church. There's chaos in the culture. There's chaos within some people's cities. There's chaos in some people's households. It's like regardless of what that little territory or big territory is, there's lots of places where there's chaos. Now,
Hmm.
I don't know if you listened to this episode. I had a conversation with my friend Aaron Tesaro. And one of the things we were talking about, we were talking about kind of a kingdom lens on how we communicate and all of those things, and to be courageous and all of those things. But we were talking about this idea of how it's easier when we have relational equity with someone
Hmm.
to have these conversations. But what I find so compelling about what you're doing is that you're creating spaces where there's not necessarily relational
Hmm.
equity. And so I'm curious about this because here you are, a Facebook group. These people don't know each other. Yes, you've created an environment, and yes, they've opted in. So maybe that's enough, there. Do you think that that's enough? Is it that people have to opt into the conversation and that creates enough?
Hmm. Well, the truth is that, like, there's a lot of talk about safe
Uh
conversations,
huh.
safe spaces, right? This is not a safe space. I will just tell you that it is
Bring
not.
it.
It's not 100%
Yeah.
safe, and but it does. But I do try to teach boundaries around it. So I'm trying to teach it as we go. So yeah, I say that right up front. Like, it might not go great. You do have to risk that. But even just coming to the table and risking that, is saying that you love another person
Yes.
enough and that you value another person enough to come to the table and to stay there, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that to me, I think I would rather have someone tell me the truth and know that it was love than either to not have the conversation. That's to me that's more painful, to not even come to the
Right.
table, to not be willing. So I think that's really love, and I think there have been conversations that got too brave for people, and certain people didn't feel comfortable because I think some of the traumas in their past maybe or whatever. Um, but I think we have to realize, the person is most likely not going to physically hurt you, like that. And they're doing it out of their goodwill, and so I think when you go into kind of the deep end and you realize even people who I don't know I can do this with, then you get a lot more brave because you're like, that wasn't actually so bad. Like, I just asked a couple questions and we realized we're actually not on different sides of this, or we just value a little bit difference of a priority or something like that. It wasn't really that much of a difference. When you get in someone's face, you realize, wow, we have a lot more in common than we realize, and we build on that.
Yeah. Part of what I really like about this, though, is that people opting in to have these conversations with people that they don't already have a depth of relationship with actually gives them practice for when the stakes, because the stakes aren't as high when you're talking to a stranger that you opted in to a similar experience with you, because all
That's
these people
true.
opted in. So it's actually giving you an opportunity to practice,
Mm-hmm.
because then those higher stake relationships that you're having to feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have to be
Right.
that much more brave. In this instance, even though we have relationship, it's just if this goes wrong, that's a bigger problem than if it goes wrong with the stranger. It's actually giving people really good practice. That's what I love about this.
That's true. That's true. And we can, I mean, we actually treat the people who are closest to us actually kind of worse sometimes.
Unfortunately, yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't have that decorum and, so yeah, it gives us practice and then we realize, okay, if I can talk to that weird person, then surely I can talk to my friend or my, spouse or whoever.
Yeah, and if you're practicing that even with folks that you're opting that have opted into experience, then if you're receiving the gift of those conversations, then you're also adding more to your knowledge and your understanding for when you're having conversations that might be when you have to make a public comments around something, or you'll
Hmm.
have greater understanding and other people's perspectives that you perhaps never heard before.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I actually ran for a political office recently, and that seems to contradict a lot of these things because you're rewarded for toxic tribalism and all this stuff. So but I realized that my hunger, this is part of my hunger for having these conversations, is because I want to learn. I just want to know. I want to know how other people talk. I want to know what their perspectives are so I can get smarter. I
Yes.
want to be able to know the issues better. And so when I get in there, I learn a whole lot. I learn a whole different language, and I can speak to people on their language. Like, you don't necessarily need to hold on to your language as the only way of talking. We need
Mm,
to be able to translate to somebody who sees it differently. And so there are those buzzwords words that either can trigger
yes.
or can add value. And so you have to choose those words wisely. And I think God is really helping us in this season, or maybe we need to seek Him more for that language,
Yeah.
that linguistic intelligence to access, so we can know how to talk to people of all types.
So can we talk about this political office that you ran for? Can we talk about it? Okay.
Sure. I talk about in the book. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So so share more about that. What kind of office were you running for? Why were you running for office? And how did all of this help you to navigate the process of campaigning and connecting and all of those things?
Yeah, I did not want to run for this office in particular. It was our city assembly. It's very volatile. Yeah, but the Lord really pushed on me quite a bit. I tried to get other people to run and it just never worked out. But so I stepped up to the plate, even though I didn't want to, even though I had already run two campaigns for someone else, just back to back, and I was tired. But the Lord just said, "You're going. Like, it's time for you to get in the ring." And so I was like, "All right, let's do this." But I always knew that. I didn't want to leave my kingdom principles at the door.
Right.
And I know that there's a lot of pressure when you get into a political situation, and the strategy and all that is that you're going to bash the other person. You're going to, because that it works.
Right.
And but I remember when I helped another person, my friend Stephanie, run her campaign. We were like, this is not how we're going to do it. Number one, we're not going to do hominem attacks. We're going to attack the issues, not the people.
Right.
The other thing was, we're not going to lose our peace. We're not,
Mm.
because in that world, it's just so easy to just run around like a chicken with your head to react to everything, not respond. And so we're like, nope, we're gonna keep moving. We're gonna be effective, but we're not gonna grind, right? Like
Right.
what you and we're not going to burn ourselves out, because
Right.
we're in this for the long haul. We're in this, the bigger picture is cultivating our culture and being a light in our city,
Yes.
not winning necessarily. And we didn't win, but we won in a lot of more important ways. And so,
Can you
yeah,
share some
so
of can you share some of those ways?
well, I don't know. The whole first, Stephanie's campaign was really big because she was going against a huge incumbent, and she, you know, she was able to, we were just having so much fun. I mean, it was like we had parties. We raised $200,000, which is for a city assembly campaign. That was huge. And we were just positive. We brought hope. Like, one of my themes was hope for our
Yes.
city. And so I feel like, we were able to represent in a really honorable way. And yeah, it was scary for both of us because we were going up against some really big guns, but we realized we were doing this and we were elevating truth. We were
Yes.
speaking hope, and we were exposing some things too. Um, but we went door to door. When you go door to door, you really get to know your city. So we just represented Christ as best as we could. And I think we made a huge impact. We galvanized people, like brought people together around one thing, and it was just a lot of joy in it.
Yeah, I
And
love
so,
that.
it was good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective, and I've, because part of keeping a kingdom lens over everything is not looking at the win just from the natural outcome of what other people would say this is what a win is. But it's like,
Right.
what did God desire to do in this? Whether that cultivated at the end in a win as far as
Hmm.
a position, or whether it's what happened as a result of you showing up to campaign, to show up, to bring an atmosphere, to bring a culture, to influence in an area of cultural chaos, right? And so looking at
Hmm.
things from that end. So I love all of this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this book, why you wrote it. So
Hmm.
is this like one of those Holy Spirit nudges where it's like, okay, time for you to write the book? So talk to me about
Yeah.
that.
I had a lot of stuff percolating in my heart, and I'd been actually teaching a lot of these principles for years, probably 10 years, some of these things. And so, I had created these little quadrants of how figure out people. And so I just had a lot of teachings, and I had been a pastor. I'd been a pastor at a church. And so, um, I, I said, now that I'm done running for office, which is exhausting, um, I met with a friend, and she's a prophetic friend, and I said, I feel like I should write a book. And she goes, oh yeah, I'm going to confirm that. And she said, and it's going to come really fast. And I was like, all right, let's go. And so I was somehow awakened at 2 a.m. on a number of days. And I ended up writing it in about 7 days, which
Wow.
is pretty good, I guess. So
Yes.
in the first draft, I will say, not,
Yes.
but still, it was definitely in there. So it was something that needed to come out.
Yes.
And I know it's for such a time as this. I know, that it is brave for me to share, because I tend to want to hold my cards a little bit more close.
Yes.
It attacks, it talks about modern versus postmodern philosophy, and how we look at those things. Because, when you are in a culture that doesn't even believe in objective truth, how do you even have a conversation? Like,
It's a good
no wonder
question.
it's so hard.
That's right.
I mean,
Like
so,
if we
yeah,
can't agree on some basic basic truths, then we're starting so far apart. There's like, how do we
right.
find those places and those spaces of conversation? But yet you're creating tools.
You
You've
can.
created tools for
Yeah,
people to be able to actually do that because on the surface,
right.
that's not easy to do. And I think you said this earlier where you're like, this is actually a skill. Like you can develop
Mhm.
the skill of doing this thing that we are called to do in the body of Christ. You know, if we're going to be salt,
Right.
if we're going to be light, if we're going to partner with the Prince of Peace to create peace in places where there is
Yes.
no peace, to be a
Mhm.
solution. You know, one of my regular prayers, Lee, these days is that I will be a sign, a wonder, and a solution in times of chaos, in times of shaking. Like
Right.
I really believe that all of us are called to be that.
Mhm.
And so you can
Right.
develop the skill, and that's what you're writing about. So I love that.
Right. And if we're believers, like we know we have access to wisdom for one,
Yes.
right? It says if we ask for wisdom, he will grant it, but only if we believe,
Yes.
right? So we have to elevate our faith to say, like, even if I'm like, oh, I'm just a peacekeeper, I'm not going to be, getting in the weeds. I don't like that's not me. Like we've been wearing our white gloves, and I use this analogy like with white
Oh, yes, I
gloves.
love this analogy. Talk yeah, share that analogy. I love that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us walk around wearing white gloves to where we don't want to touch those ugly things because we think we're too holy, or we think no, wouldn't say this, but we're like, I want to stay out of that. That's not me, and you want to identify with that. And then there's people who wear boxing gloves all the time, and all they want to do is pound on something, and we all know those people, right? And so the white glove people are like, I'm better because I don't touch those things. And the boxing glove people are like, well, you just need to get in the fight. Like, somebody needs to do this. But what I advocate for most of the time is we need to actually put on gardening gloves. We actually need to get in there and cultivate even before there's a problem. Like, we need to notice when there's problems and start to pull those things up and weed and do all that work. Not to mudsling, but to cultivate something beautiful. And so yeah, most of the time, I mean, there is a place for boxing gloves, I will say. Sometimes we do have to fight, but most of the time in everyday conversation with the people that we know and love, we have to cultivate. And so it's time to take off our white gloves in the church. And I think that's where it comes to religious isolationism, is to, you know, step away from this whole holy as thou type of thing
Yeah.
and say, you know what, there's a world dying around me. There's a world that needs me to engage. And if I think that I need to keep my gloves white, that's a form of hypocrisy.
Mm.
It's not getting in there
Yeah.
and helping our culture where they could use us.
Yeah. I mean, it's right on earth as it is heaven. It's like if we're going to be ambassadors of heaven, there's got to be something that we're releasing. And we can't just be
Right.
that we're holding things on the inside. And we actually need to cultivate that within us too, because all of us have blind spots. All of us
Hmm.
would be challenged in doing this in certain scenarios, have your own certain things that get you riled up because of your own past traumas or triggers or this or whatever. So doing this is helping us to do the thing that we're called to do as kingdom citizens, and it's helping us to cultivate our own hearts so that we can do that at greater and greater levels. Right. So it's
Right.
like all of that together. And so
Right.
it's like we are called to be courageous in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that we are a solution. A lot of us think that our friend Drew Neal talks about
Being a
solutionary, right?
solutionary, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we need to know that there is nothing that the Holy Spirit can't empower us to do. And if we think, well, I'm not good at this, we're automatically going to remove ourselves from those situations. But we can look to him for wisdom
Yes.
and courage. And I think the wisdom and courage piece kind of are two,
Yeah.
paradigms that need to marry, because some people just value, like the boxing glove people just value courage and
Yes.
not wisdom.
It's good.
And the wisdom people, sometimes they're a little lacking in courage,
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, we got to have wisdom,
Yes. I
but
don't
some
wanna
of
I don't
that
wanna
is
do
pride.
that because I wanna be wise, right? But that's the difference between just like, that spirit-led godly wisdom versus the natural wisdom. Because natural wisdom might be like, you don't wanna touch that with a 10-foot pole. That might be natural wisdom. But
Exactly.
if God's called you into that space, then he's also giving you the courage to do it and is also
Right.
giving you his wisdom, the higher wisdom in which to do it.
Right.
And I think some people, you were talking about how um, there's just I think everybody has a place and a space of where this becomes relevant. So, and for some people, it's even more relevant than others. It just depends on the areas that you're called to, the areas that you're called
Yeah.
to influence. All of us have spheres of influence, every single one of us. whether it's in our
Mhm.
households, within our families, in our communities, within our businesses, within our, wherever, within our local churches, all of those things,
Mhm.
all of us do. And so I love that you're
Yeah,
talking about this courage and wisdom together and just really being asking God for wisdom and being led of the Spirit so that you can function in these areas, in the places, in the spaces, and in the manner in
right.
which you should. I love that.
He's always gonna stretch us, isn't he? You know, because I mean, I love wisdom, and I've been asking for it since I was probably in fourth grade. But the courage piece, that was where I needed to be challenged at the moment that I was called to run for assembly.
Uh-huh.
I
Did you
was
say the
like,
purge piece?
the courage.
Oh, courage, courage. Okay, I was gonna say, wait, wait,
Mhm.
wait. You've introduced something else. I want to know.
No, no, no.
Okay, the courage
The
piece. Yes.
courage piece was where I really needed to be challenged. And it's like, well, are you going to put your money where your mouth is? Like, are you actually going to do the things that you say?
Yeah.
And that for me, the stretch was running for assembly. It was like, all right, Lord, like anything, like the thing I said, no, I would never
Like
do
anything but that.
is the thing I'm going to have to do now.
Yep.
but when, but what I experienced was when I was in that place of running, it was way more scary before I got into the place than it was when I was actually there. When I was
Mm,
actually there, I realized, yeah, I am equipped for this. Everything I've done up until now, God has equipped me for this. And I wouldn't have known that had I not stepped in.
yeah, that's good. I want to go back to your boxing analogy. So you were talking about how there's sometimes when like the boxing gloves are actually necessary.
Mhm.
So when have boxing gloves been necessary for you?
Well, I think you realize and we talk about this, when people are not for peace, right? The scripture talks about do everything you can within your power
Yeah.
to maintain your side of peace. But when that's apparently not going to happen, when people pick a fight and when they're attacking you, you do have to stand up and
Yeah.
you have to say, this is not right. And you have to expose evil sometimes. My husband actually ran for a seat in our state before all this happened. This is how we got into this political sphere. Um, and we were just pastors, we were just minister, a worship leader. I mean, of all things. But we never thought we'd step into this. But a lady who was in office currently, we found that there was some evidence that she had some voter fraud issues,
Mm,
and so we were like, okay, we've got to protect our city, our area, our state. This should not be happening. So we had to step up and fight the injustice
yeah.
that was happening. And we had to say, like, be honest about where that was, and we have to expose evil. And so I experienced something similar on the assembly where I wasn't on the assembly, but I was just asked to be on a commission, and they discriminated against me because of my religious beliefs, and that was where I had to expose that. Like, I can't just say nothing when there is this type of injustice, because it could happen to someone else,
Hmm.
and if I say nothing, then I'm not doing anyone a service. So that's where we have to realize where we are cultivating peace, but we are actually exposing evil, which is pulling up the rug and showing, like, this needs to go.
Yeah, it's almost like a boxing glove in this hand and the gardening glove in this one. Because as I'm hearing you talk about, because you're still, even when you're doing it, it's almost like you're not doing it letting go of the idea of what you're looking to cultivate. It's just that
Right.
it's coming with an edge. It's like what you were
Well,
describing. I'm like, I saw a boxing glove here and a gardening glove like here.
yeah.
Now you might have been behind your back, but you still had it. You didn't leave it behind.
And you can be really nice when you're doing it. I mean, the thing is, like, when even in a one-on-one conversation, like, it's all about boundaries. When you come to the table fully with who you are, you're not going to lie about who you are. You're not just going to nod your head
Yeah.
just because someone said something that they want you to agree with.
Right.
There's not that forced agreement. There's like, okay, here's where I stand, and I'm going to stand here, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that I'm not agreeing with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is okay. That's actually, we can love each other in that, and it's actually a stronger form of love, if we don't just acquiesce, if we don't let someone push us over. And so I think in the body of Christ, we need to realize that, being pushed over is not love.
Yeah.
Is not it's not a place that we need to be. And I think we've been used to kind of being that, kind of letting our boundaries get pushed too much. Like it's okay, I'm not gonna do that. But what we do when we don't stand up is we're actually self protecting more.
Mm.
And and at the very end of the book, I talk about false humility and
Yeah.
how that is the same thing. How we it makes us look humble, it makes us look sweet, but actually it's not at all.
That's
It's
good.
actually
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so now is this, by the way, your first book?
it is, yeah.
So that's exciting, so congrats on
It
that. So
is.
what hopes do you have as you're releasing this and putting this thing out in the world in a time that I believe is a very, very good time to release a book about, this topic? What's kind of your hope and what's God showing you around this?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First off, I think there's some really bad philosophies in our culture that are they could be our undoing for a while.
Mm,
And if we don't get around this, the postmodern philosophy, um, if we don't pinpoint it and really unravel it, it could be, a second Holocaust. I mean, it could be something really bad. We've had bad philosophies in our past, like eugenics and things like that,
yeah.
and they've led to horrible, horrible things. And so I'm hoping that that's part of what I'm trying to look at. And the other part is for Christians, especially, and for pastors, for leaders, to be able to be equipped with language that they can know how to lead people into braver conversations and into the spaces where there isn't peace.
Yeah.
Because I don't think most of us in our lifetimes have not experienced that yet. And so this is all new territory. We don't even know how to lead our kids into it. And so, if we can have healthy boundaries around it and we can have a little bit of guardrails and language that we can use to kind of put the pieces together,
Yes.
I think we can do this. And so any part, language is so important. And I think God is giving people creativity on how to talk about this, on when to talk about this, and just not just talk about it, but what to do about it as well. So I'm hoping that this can really just stir people up into a new way of looking at how we get our gardening gloves on.
Yeah, that's good. I noticed there's nothing in your title that makes it obvious on the front that you're addressing Christ followers
Right.
necessarily.
And it's not
Was that
just Christ
intentional?
followers. I think, yeah, because I really only get into it in the last two chapters of, and even in the book when I'm talking, I'm I talk to people who are not Christ followers because
Which I love.
we hear all this stuff about Christian nationalism and like we're a threat, you know,
Yeah.
and we're positioned as a threat a lot of times. And so I wanted to talk to unbelievers too and say, here's the philosophies, here's how Christianity has actually shaped your world that you might not even know about because you didn't read that in your history textbook, and how it's done you good in your life. And
Yeah.
so I
I
think,
love that.
yeah, if we can appreciate Christians and the value that they bring, even if you're not a Christian, that's what it's for too.
And that's really when you think about kingdom influence in general, it's like it's for everyone to flourish and experience the goodness of God. It's not
Right.
it's not about, it's not about everyone has to believe the same thing or all of those things. You pray that people come to into saving knowledge of Christ, but kingdom influence overall is for people to flourish and to
Absolutely.
experience the goodness of God, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they say, I love
Hmm.
them, know them, or otherwise at the moment.
Right. I mean, kingdom people, the unbelievers, I had questions when I was on the campaign trail. What's this kingdom stuff? Like, because kingdom sounds like you're trying to set up a king. It sounds like,
Facts. Right.
and so you have to translate that for unbelievers to go, actually, what it means is freedom. What it means is true liberty. Nobody's going to force you into anything. It's about prospering. And really, our whole philosophy is prospering under love. I
Yeah.
mean, who could be against that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
It's such a good point, and going back to the importance of language, right? Because there's a big difference between a kingdom with a worldly king, and the difference of a kingdom that has is ruled and reigned by Jesus Christ, like two
hmm
different kingdoms, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, so I love that, and I love that, by the way, that you wrote the book in that way. so that anybody can pick that up and be encouraged by
Mhm.
it, and find tools in it. And I love the fact that you're even showing how, and I think for many believers this is helpful too, to even have that historical perspective around how, others. This is kind of a United States, in fairness,
Right.
the
Definitely.
the tools can help anybody on any
Sure.
topic and all of those things, but
Mhm.
it really is kind of focused around the United States. But I think it's
Mhm.
helpful for people to have that
Yeah.
background and that insight, and to
Right.
be able to reflect on that, and to be able to kind of honor
Yeah.
where we've come from. So
Well, like I was talking to I don't know if you know Harold Eberly. Um,
I know who he is,
okay.
but I have not met him.
I was just talking to him on my podcast about this because I sent him in the book, and he said, I talked to, he's in the Christian world, and he actually evangelizes to Muslims.
Okay.
And he said, they're a lot more modern than they are postmodern, so it's really easier for him to talk to them. And but he's like, I need to learn this language because I'm talking to Christian leaders, and they're talking to unbelievers, and they're talking to postmoderns, and I need to learn, if I can get this language in their minds,
Yeah.
then they can do better at talking to unbelievers and talking to people who don't have a grid for this already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I like this. Okay, good. Okay. So, Leigh, how do people, because you just released this book, so how do people get their hands on it?
Yeah, well, it will be available on Amazon. I believe when this comes out, there's going to be some deals that we'll have, so you might want to get on Amazon and check that out. And yeah, that's mostly where you can get it. And my website is leesloan.com. I also have one called bravenation.online where you can get some more tools that I have. I have some classes on passion and purpose and different things like that, and on having those brave conversations. So yeah, it'd be great.
I love it. And for those who are listening, Leigh is Leigh, leesloan.com. This is really great. And then again, give the title of that book one more time. And we're going to link it up in the show notes, of course.
Pride and privilege expand your influence in cultural chaos.
Yeah, so good. Leigh, I am looking forward to hearing some of the stories that come out of those who are reading this book, and as you are helping to equip others to create spaces, and they're not necessarily, the intention is for them to be safe, but they don't always feel safe, but creating these tables for brave conversations and all of that. I just think there's so much goodness in what you're doing. So thanks for joining me, and thanks for sharing. So good.
Thank you so much, Shay. I really enjoy listening to your podcast too.
Awesome. I'm so glad.